Sign here. 90 days. Then we go back to our lives. She said it the way you'd say sign here at a car dealership. Like the whole thing was a transaction, and I was the guy behind the counter who should be grateful for the business. I looked at the paper. 12 pages. I'd read every word of it the night before, sitting at the kitchen table after Lily, my daughter, 8 years old, already too smart for her own good, had fallen asleep on the couch with her socks still on and the TV playing some cooking competition she'd already seen twice. I read every clause, and the one that mattered was on page 10. The party of the second part agrees to present himself as a committed spouse for a period not to exceed 90 calendar days, after which both parties shall resume their respective lives without legal or financial obligation to one another. Party of the second part. That's me. That's what I was. Her name was Diane Beaumont. Not Diane from the coffee shop or Diane who coaches soccer on Saturday mornings. Diane Beaumont, as in Beaumont Capital, as in the woman whose name was on the side of a building downtown I'd driven past 100 times without ever thinking about who she actually was. 44 years old. No kids. Recently separated from a man whose name I recognized from the business section of the paper. I'd come to fix her floors. That's really the whole origin story. She'd called the company I work for, Lakeview Hardwood Refinishing. It's just me and my partner, Doug. We've been doing floors in the Ottawa area for 11 years, and asked for someone to come out and look at the hardwood in her house in Rockcliffe Park. I went on a Tuesday morning. The house was the kind of house where you put on your boot covers before you walk in. Not because anyone asks you to, but because it seems wrong not to. High ceilings, big windows looking out at the river, a kitchen that had probably never seen a frozen pizza. I gave her the quote. She said fine. I came back Thursday with the equipment. She was on a phone call when I arrived. She let me in, pointed at the main hallway, and disappeared around a corner. I started pulling furniture with Doug, moving a console table that probably cost more than my truck, and I found a photo underneath it. It had slid down the back, face against the baseboard. A man and a woman, younger, somewhere warm. She was laughing. He had his hand on the back of her neck. I put it on the kitchen counter where she'd see it. She found it an hour later. I was running the sander in the living room and I saw her pick it up through the doorway. She stood there a long time, then she set it face down on the counter. I didn't say anything. There's nothing to say to that. You see a lot doing floors. People's lives are in their baseboards, in the corners behind their doors, in what they keep and what they try to hide. I've learned not to comment. We finished the job in 2 days. I handed her the invoice. She looked at it, then looked at me and said something I wasn't expecting. Do you have family obligations? A partner? I thought it was a weird way to ask if I was married. I have a daughter, I said. No partner. She nodded slowly like she was confirming something she'd already suspected. I didn't hear from her for 3 weeks, and then she called. Not the company number. My personal cell, which I'd written on the invoice in case she had questions about maintenance. She asked if I could come by the house to discuss something, not the floors, something else. I almost didn't go. I told my neighbor Gloria, who watches Lily when I have late jobs, that I'd be back by 7. I drove over to Rockcliffe, thinking she probably wanted a second opinion on some other renovation, maybe a referral. That kind of thing happens. What she wanted was a husband, not a real one. She was clear about that. Bernard Beaumont, 81 years old, still the majority shareholder of the company, even though he'd stepped back from operations, had written a clause into the family trust that she hadn't taken seriously until recently. Something about the controlling shares reverting to her younger brother if she was still unmarried by her 45th birthday, which was 4 months away. She'd talked to lawyers. The clause was airtight. Her father had written it in 1987, and she'd always assumed she'd be married long before it mattered. Then she was. Then she wasn't. Her brother, she said, wasn't someone she wanted running the company. I sat in a chair across from her in that enormous kitchen, and I listened to all of this. And I thought about Lily asleep at Gloria's, and I thought about the sander in the back of my truck, and I thought about the mortgage payment that was 3 weeks away. And I said, very carefully, what exactly are you asking? I need someone to be present at 2 family dinners and 1 board meeting in the next 90 days. Someone who can hold a conversation and doesn't look like he just fell off a turnip truck. She said it plainly, without cruelty, but also without softening it. I'm not asking for anything personal. I'm not asking for your time beyond what's necessary. I will compensate you fairly." She named a number. I should have said no. I have enough pride for that. I know what I'm worth, and it has nothing to do with what Diane Beaumont was offering to pay me. But there was Lily, who needed braces, who wanted to go to science camp in the summer, whose winter coat was a size too small and had been since October. And there was Doug, who I owed a better partnership than I'd been giving him lately, because I'd been distracted since my sister moved back to Calgary, and I was doing half the admin at home after Lily went to bed. I said I'd think about it. I went home. Gloria had put Lily to bed already. I stood in the hallway outside her room and listened to her breathe. She'd stuck glow-in-the-dark stars on her ceiling when she was 5, and I'd never taken them down. They were fading now, barely visible, but they were still there. I signed the papers the next morning. The first dinner was at Bernard Beaumont's house in Manotick. He lived in a converted farmhouse on the south end of the city, the kind of place that looks modest from the road, and then you turn up the driveway and realize it goes on for half a kilometer. Diane had briefed me in the car on the way there. Her father was sharp, she said. He'd notice things. Her brother Alain would be there with his wife, and he would definitely be looking for inconsistencies. "Just follow my lead," she said. "If he asks about your work, tell him. He respects people who do real things." "What counts as a real thing?" She looked at me sideways. "He built the company from a hardware supply business. He understands tools." I told him about the floors, about how hardwood moves with the seasons, how you have to account for humidity when you're laying boards, how the worst thing you can do in an old house is try to make it into something it's not. Bernard listened the way someone listens when they actually want to know the answer. His hands were on the table, and they were the hands of someone who'd used them. Elaine watched me across the table with the careful attention of a man who knew something was wrong, but couldn't find where to press. His wife talked about their upcoming trip to Portugal. Their kids, both teenagers, were bored and barely looked up. On the drive home, Diane was quiet for a long time. "He liked you," she finally said. "He's a good man. He is," she said. And something in her voice shifted just slightly, like a door that wasn't all the way closed. I didn't see her for 2 weeks after that. The agreement didn't require it. I went back to work. Lily had a school play where she was cast as a talking maple tree, and she took it extremely seriously, practicing her one line. "I have stood here for 200 years. With a solemnity that made me have to leave the room so she wouldn't see me trying not to laugh. I went to the play. I sat in the second row. She found my face in the crowd right before her line, and she said it to me, just to me, and her voice didn't shake at all. I thought about calling Diane that night, and I didn't know why. So I didn't. She called me instead the following Saturday. Her car had broken down on the Queensway. Just a dead battery. She'd called CAA, they were on their way, but something about the way she told me made me think she hadn't called because she needed help. She'd called because she didn't know who else to call. I drove out anyway. The CAA truck was already there by the time I arrived. She was standing on the shoulder in a coat that wasn't warm enough, her hands in her pockets. She looked at me when I pulled up, and for a second she looked almost relieved, and then she put the look away, the way she put most things away. "You didn't have to come," she said. I was up. It was 9:30 in the morning. We went for coffee at a Tim Hortons on Merivale, because it was the closest thing open, and I think she hadn't been in one in years. She held the cup with both hands and looked at the menu board for a long time like she was studying for something. "Do you ever feel like you built a life that fits perfectly on paper?" she said, "and then one day you notice you can't quite breathe in it?" I thought about it. "Yeah," I said. "Right before my marriage ended." She looked at me. "We were fine on paper," I said. "On paper, we were exactly what we were supposed to be. It just wasn't enough for either of us. We were better friends than we were married. Is she still in your life? She's in Lily's life, which is what matters." Diane was quiet for a while. Then she said, "I don't know how to need people. I was taught that needing people was the same as being weak. My father is the exception, but even with him I learned early not to ask for more than he had to give." I didn't say anything. Sometimes the right move is to let the thing just sit there. We stayed for almost an hour. She paid. I let her. The board meeting was in week 7. Diane had prepared me more thoroughly for this one. She'd explained the company's structure, the key people, what the meeting was actually about. I didn't have to speak. I just had to be there in the room, recognizable as her husband in the way that a signed contract can make something recognizable without making it true. I wore the one suit I own. It's charcoal gray. I bought it for a cousin's wedding 4 years ago. And it still fits because I spend my days on my knees on hardwood floors, and I don't own a desk chair. Diane looked at it and didn't say anything, which I took to mean it was fine. We rode the elevator together to the 14th floor. She had her phone in her hand and she was reading something fast, the way she read everything. The elevator music was a version of a tragically hip song slowed down to the point where it was almost unrecognizable. "Is that ahead by a century?" I said. She looked up, listened. "I think so. That should be a crime." She almost smiled. It was quick, like she caught it and put it back, but it was there. The meeting lasted 3 hours. I sat beside her and I watched her work. That's the only word for it, work. She knew every number, every question before it was asked, every angle her brother tried to come at her from. He was smart, Alan, but she was sharper. She'd been doing this her whole life, and he'd been waiting for her to fail. At one point during a break, Bernard came and sat beside me with a coffee and said, very quietly, "She doesn't let people in easily." "I know," I said. "She didn't used to be like that." He looked at his hands. Her mother was the same way after she got sick. Built walls to protect herself from the sympathy. I think Diane learned it from watching her. I didn't know what to say to that, so I said, "She's the most capable person I've ever seen in a room." Bernard nodded. "Yes," he said. "But capability isn't the same as happiness, is it?" It wasn't a question. We were on day 78 when she called me at 11 at night. I was still awake. I'd been doing the monthly invoicing at the kitchen table, the kind of work that sounds simple but takes me forever because I hate it. And Lily had been in bed for 2 hours, and the house was quiet the way it only gets when she's asleep. "I know it's late," Diane said. "It's fine. My father had a minor cardiac event this afternoon. He's stable. He's home. The doctors say it was a warning, not..." She stopped. "He's fine. He'll be fine. I'm glad he's fine." Silence. "Are you okay?" I said. Another silence, longer. I don't know how to answer that question. You don't have to answer it. I can just stay on the line. And that's what we did. For almost 40 minutes. She talked sometimes and didn't other times, and I didn't try to fill the space when it was empty. I made myself another cup of tea. She didn't cry. I don't think she would have let herself cry on the phone, but at some point the way she was breathing changed, loosened, like she'd been holding something and finally set it down. Before she hung up, she said, "You're different than I thought you were." "I'm pretty much exactly what I looked like when you hired me," I said. "That's what I mean," she said, and she hung up. Day 85. She asked me to bring Lily to a fundraiser at the National Arts Center. I almost said no. I kept my daughter separate from all of this. That had been an internal rule I'd made for myself. But Lily had been asking about the NACI since her class visited for a school trip, and I told myself it was just a building, just an evening, and I'd keep it simple. Lily wore her dress with the little blue flowers, and announced in the car that she was going to remember every single detail so she could write about it for her journal. She's been keeping a journal since she was 6. Covers all the important themes, her pet fish Gerald, the injustice of bedtime, and what she calls observations about adults. Diane met us at the entrance. She crouched down to Lily's level immediately, which I hadn't expected, and said, "I've heard you're very observant." Lily looked at her seriously. "I'm writing a book," she said. "What's it about?" "People," Lily said. "Mostly what they do when they think nobody's looking." Diane looked up at me. I shrugged. They spent 20 minutes at the food table talking about something I wasn't part of. I watched from a few feet away and I noticed that Diane talked to Lily the same way she talked to Bernard, like the conversation was worth her full attention. Not performing interest. Actually interested. On the way home, Lily fell asleep in the back seat and Diane and I stood on the steps outside while I waited for my car to pull around. "She's extraordinary," Diane said. "She really is. She gets that from you, I think." She said it carefully, like she wasn't sure she had the right to say it. "She gets it from herself," I said. "I'm just trying not to get in the way." Diane looked at me for a moment. Then she looked out at the river, the lights of Gatineau on the other side. "I've been thinking," she said. "About?" After day 90. She said it to the river, not to me. "I don't know what that looks like." "It looks like our original agreement," I said. "Which was your idea and it was a reasonable one." Was it? I didn't answer right away. My car came. I got Lily out of the back seat. She barely woke up, mumbled something about Gerald, went back to sleep, and I buckled her in. And then I stood there with my hand on the door. I think you made a smart agreement, I said. I think you know what you need and you went out and got it. That's not a bad thing. I need you to stop being fair about everything, she said. It's extremely inconvenient. I laughed. I couldn't help it. And she did too. Both of us standing on the steps of the NAC at 11 o'clock at night, laughing at something that wasn't quite a joke. And it was one of those moments that feels important before you can explain why. Day 90. I showed up at the house. She'd asked me to come, which wasn't in the agreement, but she'd asked, so I came. I had the copy of the contract in a folder in my jacket pocket, both pages of the amendment we'd signed at the beginning saying that either party could close it out with a handshake and no further documentation required. She opened the door before I knocked. She'd been waiting. She was wearing something I hadn't seen before. Not the structured corporate things she usually wore, but just dark jeans and a sweater. And her hair wasn't done the way she usually did it. She looked like someone who had made a decision to stop performing and wasn't sure what came after. "Come in," she said. I came in. We sat at the kitchen table, the same kitchen where I'd given her the quote on the floors 14 weeks ago. She'd made coffee, which was something. She didn't usually make coffee. There was always someone to make coffee. "I talked to Bernard this morning," she said. "He told me something." "Okay." "He said that the night of the board meeting, when he sat beside you, you told him I was the most capable person you'd ever seen in a room." "That's true," he said. She stopped. Started again. "He said he's been waiting 30 years for someone to see me that way. Without the but. Without she's capable but cold or she's impressive but difficult. Just capable." Like that was enough. I didn't say anything. "I don't know what to do with you," she said. It came out quietly. Not angry, not romantic. Just honest. The way a person talks when they've stopped managing the conversation. "You don't have to do anything with me," I said. "The 90 days are done. The shares are secure. Your father is okay. That's the whole outcome, is it?" I put the folder on the table. She looked at it. She didn't touch it. "I have a daughter who put glow-in-the-dark stars on her ceiling when she was 5. I said, "And I haven't taken them down because every night I go in to check on her, and they're still there, fading, and I think, this is enough. This is a whole life. I don't need more than this. But, I said, I've spent the last 3 months thinking about your father's farmhouse and the way you hold a coffee cup and the fact that you knew who the hip were, even in elevator form. And that's new. That hasn't happened to me in a long time." She was quiet. Outside, the river was doing what the river does. The house was warm. "I'm not easy," she said. "I'm aware of that. I've been told on more than one occasion with some specificity. I do floors," I said. "I know how to work slowly. I know how to be patient with something old that has good bones." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and she moved the folder to the side. Not into the recycling. Not away entirely. Just to the side, like something that might still have a use but wasn't needed right now. "I'd like to meet Gerald," she said. "Gerald is a fish. He has a 4-second memory and very strong opinions about feeding time. Sounds manageable." I stayed for dinner. We ordered Lebanese from a place on Bank Street and we ate at the kitchen table. And she asked me about Doug and the business and what hardwood I'd recommend for a sunroom. Lily called at 8 to say goodnight to me, and I handed the phone to Diane on impulse, without thinking about it. And Lily talked to her for 7 minutes about her book. When I left, Diane stood at the door the way Bernard stood at the door at his farmhouse, like she'd been doing it longer than she thought. I drove home on the Queensway, and the city was quiet, and the river caught the lights the way it always does in November, and I thought about what Bernard had said. Capability isn't the same as happiness. I'm not a complicated man. I refinish floors. I pack my daughter's lunch. I try not to let the invoicing pile up. I've been alone long enough that I stopped thinking about not being alone. But I drove home that night with the window cracked even though it was cold, and I thought, this is what it feels like when something is starting. Not the idea of something. The actual thing. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't talk myself out of it.